Let us pray. In our mind's eye, let us see the awesome grandeur of the Rockies, the denseness of our forests, the fertility of our farmland, the splendor of our rivers, the richness of our resources. Then, O Lord, let us rededicate ourselves as wise stewards of such bounty on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
The Honourable the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the 37th Annual Public Contributions Act report for the year 1988.
The Honourable the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly this morning the annual report for 1988-89 of the Association of Professional Engineers, Geologists, and Geophysicists of Alberta.
The Honourable the Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table question 201 from our last session.
The Honourable the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report of the Environmental Council of Alberta.
Introduction of special guests.
The Honourable the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Thank you very much. Today, Mr. Speaker, in the Assembly are two visitors from Montreal who are taking an opportunity to visit our beautiful province of Alberta. Mr. Dmitry Novatovsky with his wife Helen. Also accompanying them are their son Ihor here of the city of Edmonton and a trusted employee of the Legislative Assembly of the province of Alberta, Kathy Bruce Kavanagh. I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has claimed on a number of occasions that the sweeping new powers contained in Bill 5 are needed to transfer 4 facilities to local boards. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we've maintained that these facilities could be transferred with the wording of the previous departments of the Act. The references, Mr. Speaker, to sale or lease to any person or organization are not needed. Now, Mr. Speaker, the President of the Alberta Hospital Association has said that its own legal review clearly said that there are some ambiguities that need to be cleared up. Mr. Speaker, also the Senior Vice President of the Hospital Association has told our office that, in their legal opinion, shows that the Minister's stated intention to transfer 4 facilities could be achieved using the wording that appeared in previous departmental acts. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is this. Will the Minister now finally admit that Section 11 of Bill 5 goes far beyond her stated intentions, and will she now tell us that she's going to either amend this section or withdraw it for the time being?
No, I won't, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Hospital Association has clearly come out against what this minister has said, and she sits in this House and says she will not withdraw it. My question is to the minister, is there intentions then to go further than her stated intentions? That's the only thing that we can come from, Mr. Speaker.
That's a very different question, Mr. Speaker. I stated in this House on June the 19th that I would review government's intention and the wording in the Act, and that I would report back to this House at the appropriate time with respect to the decision of the government in that matter. The bill will be open for second reading. It's on the order paper whenever it comes up, and committee will follow. and the response to exactly that question and the results of that review will be made at that time.
Mr. Speaker, that's precisely the worry that we have. It may be too late. Given that this minister handled the School Act, I think, in a very sensible way, and allowed people to have time, and she came back with a different act, why is she being so stubborn with this act, and why doesn't she do the same thing?
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, it's not my intent to be stubborn. I simply believe that the review has to take place. The intent of government was clearly enunciated on June the 19th, and the response will come at the appropriate time. It may not be the appropriate time in the eyes of the Leader of the Opposition, but it will be the appropriate time for the sponsor of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, we'll see. Anyhow, my next question is to the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Speaker, and I have in front of me the press release of March 3rd, 1988, when the government announced a $55 million loan guarantee and a $12 million loan to Gainers Properties Incorporated. Mr. Speaker, and I quote what they said at that time: "The financing will enable Gainers to develop two significant capital projects, a hog slaughter plant in southern Alberta and an upgraded and modernized beef and pork processing plant in Edmonton. The projects are expected to create approximately 400 direct jobs and 1,200 direct employment opportunities within the month." Mr. Speaker, in there's no mention of maintaining jobs, which the minister talked about yesterday. Mr. Speaker, we know that $6 million has already been loaned to Gainers Properties Incorporated. In view of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that this money has not been used for what it's been supposed to be used, Albertans want to know this very simple question, Mr. Speaker: what is that money being used for?
Mr. Speaker, I've indicated that on a number of occasions in this Legislative Assembly what the money is being used for, and I will quote, as the Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party has quoted, that it is to upgrade and modernize the beef and pork processing plant in Edmonton. The Honourable Member just quoted that. Well, if that's not maintaining jobs in the City of Edmonton, I don't know what is maintaining jobs in the City of Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, again he evades the question. It was meant to increase jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it says in the press release. But, Mr. Speaker, given that the government money went to Gainers Properties Incorporated, which the president of Gainers says is a completely separate company from Gainers itself, and he doesn't know where the money's gone, I want to ask this minister, how can the minister know that the money that has been loaned out is being used to benefit Gainers at all and it's not being used for some other venture by Mr. Pocklington?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, let me indicate to the Honourable Member he shouldn't twist the statements by the President of Gainers, Mr. Bevan, because I understand yesterday, and I saw it on television, that Mr. Bevan indicated that some money had gone to the upgrading of the facility in Edmonton. So the Honourable Member should not indicate something contrary or twist statements that have been said by others, and I only go by what I saw. I would offer the suggestion to the Honourable Member that he not twist other statements. In addition to that, I should indicate to the Honourable Member that the administration, the declaration and whatnot, as I indicated to the Honourable Member from Vegreville, falls under the provincial treasurer. So in the event that there are questions as it relates to the follow-up and the usage, the policing of that falls to the provincial treasurer. But I am happy to indicate again, as I have done in the past, that the agreement indicated that a plant would start construction prior to June of 1989 in southern Alberta. An extension was granted to them at their request to put that date forward to September 89 of this year. In the event that construction has not started at that date, I've left the House with the assurance that the additional $2 million on the drawdown of the $12 million loan that has been offered will not be forthcoming, and we will exercise the full force of the law to make sure that the terms of that agreement will be lived up to.
Mr. Speaker, this company is in serious financial difficulty, and his department does administer the loans, Mr. Speaker. And that money's gone. We're not talking about the loans in October. And the people want to know, and you should know, Mr. Speaker, where has that money gone? Tell us now in this legislature, Mr. Speaker.
I'm happy to indicate to the honourable member, as was indicated by the previous Minister of Economic Development, that securities are given. We have securities in place for both a loan guarantee and the loan. For the information of the honourable member, in the event that there is some type of forfeit, there are securities that will be in place so that the people of this province are protected.
Thank you. The honourable member.
Calgary Northwest.
The honourable member for Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Alberta are up to their eyebrows with this Pocklington empire, and it shows signs of faltering, and it seems we're having some difficulty getting legitimate answers to very legitimate questions. We're on the hook to Mr. Pocklington for about $120 million in loans and grants and guarantees, and he has another open door for another $50 million or so. And the issue is bigger than just Mr. Pocklington. There's been a number of guarantees to quite a number of businesses across a variety of industries for billions of dollars, and we need answers, and we need some now. And I want to go back to the Minister of Economic Development. He just said we have securities. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development, do we have 100% assurance that all of Mr. Pocklington's assets, including his personal assets, are on the line so that if this company fails, the people of Alberta are not going to be left holding the bag for Mr. Pocklington's financial responsibilities?
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the honourable member from Calgary has indicated that we have participated with other companies. It appears as if the two opposition parties are attempting to center in on one specific company that's involved in the food processing sector that we've offered help to. We've offered help to a number of companies, and we don't apologize for that help, Mr. Speaker, but what we have to find out, we've helped a number of companies, recognizing the importance that those companies play to the job creation, to the diversification, to the enhancement of our food processing sector, to the enhancement of the agricultural community, and we're going to continue to offer that hope on a sound economic basis. The agricultural community, as has the energy community, gone through some difficult times. In the last number of years, we've involved ourselves in the economy in an aggressive way so that we could sustain job creation within this province. We've been successful in that. Admittedly, at times there are going to be failures, but overall we've been very successful in creating jobs for Albertans, and we're going to continue that thrust.
My second question is directed to the Minister of Agriculture. Another one of Mr. Pocklington's empires is palm dairies. My question is, can the Minister of Agriculture assure us about palm dairies is not going to go under or is not in financial difficulty as Gainers appears to be in? Are we not going to lose money there?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the House Alberta Agriculture is in no way involved with palm dairies as far as its financing is concerned. As far as I know, it is continuing to accept the milk allocation from the Dairy Control Board and is continuing to process milk and milk products.
My final question then is directed to the Premier. Does the Premier not see how unacceptable it is to withhold information and hide information about the use of public funds as has been happening with the Pocklington empire?
Mr. Speaker, quite the contrary. There's been no holding back of public information. As a matter of fact, this government's statement has been made over a period of some time now, and it has been this: the government recognizing the problems facing this province when we had an economy that was based too heavily on agriculture and energy. We're going to get into a fist fight to diversify this economy. The government was going to spread economic opportunities throughout the province, and the government was recognizing that a lot of people have talked about it before, but we're making it happen, and we're doing it with all the strength at our command, and it is happening. And the reason that it's happening all across this province is the efforts of this government. And I must tell the House and the people of Alberta, because diversification is happening in such a dramatic way, because unemployment is falling, because there's confidence and investment in this province, the opposition parties don't like it. They're the blues boys over there.
The honourable member for Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Advanced Education, and it concerns the Brooks campus of the Medicine Hat College. In the throne speech on February 17th this year, it was stated that the Brooks campus would be proceeded with. In discussions that I've had with the chairman of the Medicine Hat College Board, who, by the way, is one of my constituents, he says that it's not possible to proceed with this project with the budget commitment that was made to it. Could the minister tell us what the present status of this project is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct. The government was committed to and honours its commitments of expansion of the Medicine Hat College with regard to the Brooks campus. The government has, in the budget this year, $93 million in advanced education for capital projects, a very, very aggressive capital budget. The chairman and the board of Medicine Hat College have been informed, Mr. Speaker, that they can go ahead with planning purposes at the Brooks campus, and they can utilize the funds which have been accumulated in the Endowment Incentive Fund.
Mr. Speaker, if they were to proceed with the construction of Brooks campus through funds from some of their own reserves, could they be guaranteed that this money would be returned to the reserves at a later date?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is of the view that the reserves at any public college are in many ways reserves accumulated from the taxpayers of Alberta, and it's the position of the department that it's not unreasonable to request that these public institutions give consideration to using some of their accumulated reserves for the actual construction of their projects.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it a policy of advanced education that they, when they're committed to a building project of this type, that they should use at least a portion of the reserves before they get funding from advanced education in the capital project?
Well, obviously, Mr. Speaker, each project has to be looked at on its own. The department and the government's very proud of what they've been able to do to date with regard to the building of capital projects. The department's of the view that it's not unreasonable where a public institution such as Medicine Hat College, which has, through good management, frugal management, accumulated these reserves, nonetheless, to a great degree, they are taxpayers' dollars of the province, and the department asks these institutions to seriously consider their participation through these reserves in capital projects. So I don't think it's unreasonable on behalf of the department or the government to follow this course of action. In a nutshell, the policy is one that I think, as minister, is effective and works, and hopefully the cooperation of the institutions will see that these educational opportunities continue to exist for all Albertans.
The honourable member for Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark and Calgary Bow.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of the Environment. One of the minister's appointees to the Citizens Advisory Panel has already resigned. Mr. Dave MacArthur of Lac La Biche cites a conflict of interest arising from the fact that he may do business with the pulp mill. I say again, arising from the fact that he may do business with the pulp mill. What passes for an environmental impact assessment from the Mitsubishi Honshu Corporation cites their purchase of 125 logging trucks, 10 small trucks, 90 pickup trucks, 200 cars a year, 2,000 heavy tires, 500 light tires a year. I wonder if the minister has had discussions with any other appointees to determine from them if they may be in the same position as Mr. MacArthur.
Mr. Speaker, I doubt it very much, and I don't think that there's a local dealership selling that kind of equipment anywhere these days, but if there were, I think all the better for the economy of Alberta.
No tires? I'm sure Mr. Hunter will be insulted that you don't think you can buy a pickup truck or a car from him. In any case, in view of the fact that there is no process surrounding this panel, placing panel members in a fairly awkward position, assessing what their status is vis-a-vis the process, will the minister at least produce terms of reference for the panel, including conflict of interest guidelines, before he tries to ram ahead with it?
Mr. Speaker, the panel, once the federal government representatives are put in place, will be given the flexibility to develop terms of reference. This is an entirely new process, Mr. Speaker, an entirely new model for environmental impact assessments in this province and indeed in this country. Mr. Speaker, you know, the opposition wanted public hearings. We've got public hearings that will stretch from Athabasca to the Northwest Territories. They wanted intervenor funding. They've got intervenor funding. They wanted the cumulative reports, the cumulative impact of old pulp mills, present and in the future. That is going to be done. They wanted federal government involvement. That is going to be done, Mr. Speaker. You know, I think, Mr. Speaker, that they expect me to perform miracles from time to time, and I'm sure that if the NDP saw me walk on water, they'd issue a press release saying Klein can't swim.
Can't protect the environment, that's for sure.
That's the real thing.
It's interesting the minister should mention the federal government. Even though it's not perfect, there are federal guidelines that cover these things, and I want to know if he will withdraw the ultimatum which his executive assistant says he faxed to Ottawa this morning, and develop a joint federal-provincial strategy in this thing before he goes ahead with it, not try to make it up after the fact.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was no ultimatum. There was a communication that will lead to a cooperative situation whereby the federal government will serve with us to put in place an environmental impact assessment that will determine and prove out the highest environmental standards in the world.
The honourable member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
It's interesting that the minister would be taking credit for federal participation when he's been dragged kicking and screaming to have them do that. Mr. Speaker, it's now absolutely clear that the newly appointed ALPAC Environmental Review Board is a complete disaster. The process of appointments and providing intervenor funding is clearly biased. If it's biased, it will be without credibility. To the Minister of the Environment, since the County of Athabasca has already shown its clear bias by granting ALPAC a permit to begin construction without environmental approval, how could this minister rely upon the County of Athabasca to make impartial recommendations for board membership and for funding public intervenors?
Here we go, you know, Mr. Speaker, the Chippendale of the environmental world. You know, it's oh yeah, for sure. What was the question?
You know what the squirrel loses if he doesn't know where he put it.
Order, please. I must, in the interest of all members of the Assembly, I know everybody's enjoying themselves, but I think there's quite a few members who would like to get on this morning and this week. And so if the honourable member could quickly re-put his question.
My preferred response to the Chippendale comment, Mr. Speaker, would be completely and utterly unparliamentary. Since the County of Athabasca has already shown its bias by granting ALPAC to begin a permit to begin construction without environmental approvals, how could this minister rely upon the County of Athabasca to make impartial recommendations for board memberships and for funding public interveners? That's my first question.
Well, my understanding, Mr. Speaker, is that the Development Appeal Board, or the planning jurisdiction in the county of Athabasca, granted a development permit. I understand that there's an appeal process relative to that permit. This is strictly a matter of municipal jurisdiction, and I've indicated to the proponents, Alberta Pacific, that if indeed they are successful in getting their development permit, and if they proceed with earthwork, they do so entirely at their own risk.
I don't want to say that. Thanks. Since Mr. MacArthur has, rightly so, disqualified himself, and he should be congratulated for that, over concern with conflict of interest, could this minister please explain how he can possibly allow Mr. Hunter to remain on the board when his auto dealership will clearly benefit economically from the construction of this mill? How could he possibly be impartial in this process?
Mr. Speaker, I assume everyone in the area will benefit. Everyone in the area, including this area, will benefit. And at this point, there is a wild assumption that he is in some way going to sell a car or something else to this company. That is an assumption at this point. With respect to the other gentleman, the gentleman who declined to sit on the board, he felt that indeed, as a member of a consulting company, that he would be doing business with a business that in turn would be doing business with the pulp mill company. I think that there is a vast difference, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has identified the problem exactly. All of these people will benefit economically from that process. In light of that, and therefore, and therefore cannot be impartial. In light of that, I'd like to ask this question. Is the minister aware of the Ontario Environmental Review Board process comprised of 12 highly qualified, impartial experts in the business, law, science, and administration of the environment who do not have local interest in given projects, and if they do, they disqualify themselves?
Mr. Speaker, this is a Made in Alberta program. This is a Made in Alberta program involving the federal government, involving people from across this country, involving people in the Northwest Territories, involving ordinary Albertans, involving experts. I think, Mr. Speaker, this will serve as probably the best model, not only in Alberta but across this country. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary-Bow.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Premier. The first annual Premier Stampede Breakfast, in which Alberta agricultural products were featured, was held in Calgary on July the 10th, 1989. In spite of the rainfall, it was a great success. There have been some question as to whether or not the opposition members of the legislature were invited to the breakfast. Mr. Premier, could you please answer that question? Were the opposition MLAs invited?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, everybody was invited to the breakfast, and I must say that there was a tremendous turnout of Albertans, southern Albertans in the majority, but Albertans from all other parts as well. The breakfast was a huge success. It was a difficult weather day, but nevertheless, there were no special invitations sent to any particular person, but everybody was invited, and there's nobody I would have rather fed food to than members of the opposition.
Supplemental. Mr. Premier, just to be very clear, were there special mailed invitations only for the breakfast, or was there a very general invitation?
Mr. Speaker, there were no specific mailed invitations. Rather, it was a public announcement that everybody was invited. I know the members of the opposition now and then like to deal in rumors. Well, the rumor is that because it was a 7 a.m. function, they just couldn't get up that early and come to it. If we'd had an evening cocktail party, you'd have beat them away with a stick.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands.
We're all supposed to say one, Albie.
Hey, Slimy.
Right.
Slime bucket.
It's about the size of it. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the Premier if he would immediately start forbidding cabinet ministers who have financial interests in companies from taking part in any cabinet discussions or decisions related to those companies as a first step in resolving conflict of interest problems in his government. And he replied, and I quote from the Blues, "Mr. Speaker, that happens now." Now, Mr. Speaker, that's not what the technology minister says. That's not what the forestry minister says. It's not what the touristy minister says. So I'd like to ask the Premier this. Will he tell us who's telling the truth and who's lying?
Mr. Speaker, there's nobody lying, and the honourable member shouldn't try and draw that allegation.
Lying, God.
That's fine then, Mr. Speaker. If the Premier is so adamant that he prohibits conflict of interest in cabinet meetings, will he produce and table a list of the ministers which he forced to absent themselves from cabinet discussions, what those cabinet discussions related to during the last 6 months?
Mr. Speaker, obviously all honourable members know that cabinet discussions are all private.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, that's no way to get out of misleading this House. The Premier said yesterday he already does it. Will he tell us which ministers he sends out of cabinet and under what circumstances, broadly or narrowly defined, he does that to keep them out of the conflict of interest that they're miring in?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, the member carries within her own question false allegations. So really, as Mr. Speaker, it's a question that is so filled with negative thinking and such a wonderful summer day in Alberta. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, she'll have to take her reply from my second answer to her, and that is that obviously, and it has been in tradition and continues now, that cabinet discussions are private.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, presently many Albertans are forced to work on their Sabbath day, even though many of those same people don't want to do so, preferring instead to be with their families. Even the Family Day legislation does nothing to accommodate similar needs. Yesterday, the Minister of Labour indicated to the House that nothing would be done to ensure that mothers, fathers, children are free to practice their Sabbath without reprisals in their employment. Incredibly, the Minister finds it acceptable that people are forced to juggle employment opportunities to make special arrangements in order to practice their Sabbath. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are thousands of Alberta workers who don't have the luxury of being able to do that. My question is to the Premier. Is the Premier prepared to reconsider his position and to direct the Minister to change legislation to stop people from being forced to work on their Sabbath if they desire?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Labour dealt with this matter last night. The House had the chance under Committee of the Whole to vote on it, and they voted in the affirmative. When the Honourable Minister returns, if the member for Edmonton Gold Bar would like to renew her questioning on it, she should take the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question was to the Premier related to his position in directing the Minister. However, let me continue. Mr. Speaker, is the Premier prepared now to include in his Family Day Act legislation that mothers, fathers, or children will not be compelled to work on that day if they don't want to?
Mr. Speaker, the Family Day legislation is proceeding through the House, first and second reading. It will be up for committee study. The honourable member should take her argument to the House in the normal way and see if she can carry the day with her arguments.
Just like Pocklington, no answers.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this just seems to me to be on the edge of hypocrisy. How can the Premier then propose Family Day as a means to strengthen families while denying them at the same time the right to a protected Sabbath? I intend to, and I...
Mr. Speaker, it's really strange. The honourable members, I know they have a rookie leader who doesn't know what he's doing in here, but frankly, there is a process for legislation in this House, and the legislation proceeds, I say it again, for him and others, and it's the first, second, and third reading plus committee study and royal assent. And members have all the opportunity that has been given over years of tradition in our parliamentary system, and they should avail themselves of it. And if they have the ability to convince the House, then the changes are made. It's a challenge for them, Mr. Speaker, but all they have to do is take the challenge on and see if they're up to the job. See if they're up to the job, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The past year has seen a great erosion in service levels at the Land Titles Office in Calgary and infuriating delays in processing and registering documents. Even though user fees have dramatically increased at the Land Titles Office in the past year, it's now not unusual for document registration to take up to 10 or even 14 days, a process that used to take 1 or 2 days. In view of the fact that each single day adds to the costs of interim financing, can the Attorney General advise what he's prepared to do to improve the Land Titles Office situation for the thousands of Calgary home buyers and sellers using that facility every year?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Fish Creek is correct in the fact that the service level has deteriorated. I might explain that there's two main reasons for that. There was a period of restraint that resulted in some management changes at Land Titles. There was also the institution of the ELTA project, which is a computerization project. And with a combination of those two initiatives, there has been a decrease in the level of service. But it might indicate that the people presently employed at Land Titles are doing yeoman service in working overtime. And I have had numerous meetings with my department officials over the past number of weeks, devising a system whereby we can move personnel from other sections of our department into Land Titles to attempt to correct this. Also, when the ELTA project is in place, there will be a significant improvement.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could just add a supplementary question to the reference the Attorney General made to a system. I'm assuming that's an automated system of some sort. Could the Attorney General share with the Assembly today his expectations in any specific way as to the intended benefits of that automated system?
Mr. Speaker, the automated system is certainly going to make it easier to process the numerous pieces of paper that flow through Land Titles. I don't think anybody should go away with the expectations that this computerized system is going to result in automatic turnaround times. But I might share with the member, the Calgary office had 2 teams of, under the present system, processing, and they processed approximately 600 titles in 1 day. And the new system under the electronic system with fewer people processed 500 titles, or 500 odd titles in 1 day. So it does show that there should be some improvement through that system, but it won't be the be-all and end-all.
Well, finally, Mr. Speaker, given the Attorney General's less than enthusiastic expectations of the new system, would he be prepared to speak to the Premier and the Provincial Treasurer and make representations on behalf of all those Calgarians that in fact are paying an indirect tax through those inefficiencies and get the additional manpower that's needed there?
Mr. Speaker, I more than happy to not only speak to the Premier and the Treasurer, but to take a plan of action before Treasury Board that will hopefully result in lessening this burden on people who are transferring the property.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Solicitor General and concerns a serious accident that occurred in 1986, the driver being a chap called Kevin Konkolis. One of the very badly injured victims of that accident, the Solicitor General will recall, is a little girl now 6 called, I believe, Melissa Schmitz. And her family have had difficulty, Mr. Speaker, getting reasonable advances from the unsatisfied judgment fund, which seems is picking up the tab here, for the rehabilitation of this little girl. And I wonder whether the Solicitor General can assure us, Mr. Speaker, that he will instruct his department to interpret the relevant section, which I think is number 20 of the Motor Vehicle Accident Indemnity Act, interpret in a reasonable fashion so that the maximum benefit can be got for this little girl.
I thank the honourable member from Strathcona for raising this matter, because it does highlight a tragic situation in respect to drinking and driving, and in this particular family who have now moved to Manitoba. I would advise the honourable member that we have already contributed on an interim basis only amounts up to $4,000 for items of convenience for this tragic victim that exists. I'm sure the honourable member, though, as I do, both being of the same profession, recognize that under this particular unsatisfied judgment fund legislation, that there are conditions which must be met before payment can be made of any significant amounts in any event. And at this time, there is a fierce battle going on between 2 insurance companies. Now, I recognize, Mr. Speaker, as does my honourable colleague in the opposition, that unfortunately the victims at times suffer the results of these court battles that go on between large bodies. I will, however, Mr. Speaker, assure the honourable member in opposition that I will review this case within the next 7 days.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether the Solicitor General will also review the section itself and propose any amendments to this House that may be reasonable to remove what, on the face of it, do appear to be undue restrictions on the advance of money.
Mr. Speaker, again, we fortunately are a society of law, and we're guided by laws, but I think we have to keep in mind, as all of us want to do, these laws are for the benefit and protection of all people in society. And where that does not appear to be the case, and if there's one particular section as being suggested of an act which is preventing that, I am more than willing to review the section itself.
And Mr. Speaker, on the wider picture, the limit is $200,000 arising out of any one accident, the maximum limit in the Motor Vehicle Accident Indemnity Act, the minimum limit for insurance. And perhaps the Solicitor General can undertake to us that he will have a look at that bigger picture now and see whether perhaps the time has not come to raise those limits.
I think, Mr. Speaker, when we refer to limits in legislation such as this, we must be prepared to look at the feasibility of that limit equaling what we perceive a justified court award would be made, because they are, after all, for the purposes of rehabilitation and the loss of expectations and whatnot, and inflation defeats the limits that become set, and I think in that regard it should be reviewed as well.
The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the Minister, I'm sure, is quite aware the domestic cattle and buffalo herds up, or domestic cattle and buffalo herds are as close to 60 kilometers up here in northern Alberta at the Federal Wood Mountain or Wood Buffalo National Park to a very infected herd that has brucellosis and tuberculosis both. And also, Mr. Speaker, I think if the minister's not already aware of it, we have 3.7 million head of cattle in Alberta, both in beef and milk, and an industry of $2.5 billion annually, and a large part of the value of that is the fact that Alberta, Canada's been able to maintain the reputation of being brucellosis and tuberculosis, brucellosis particularly, free. So it's a very real concern that something be done about this herd in northern Alberta. Can the minister report, Mr. Speaker, whether there are any talks with the federal officials as to a solution that they've come up with or a deadline that they've come up with?
Mr. Speaker, I must say that I'm impressed that the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon is doing some research and starting to get some correct numbers and trying to convince the House that he has some knowledge about this industry. I would say that we on this side of the House in Alberta Agriculture certainly share the concern about keeping the Alberta cattle herd brucellosis free, keeping in mind that the buffalo that he is making reference to are on federal park territories. We've got ongoing discussions with the federal government to attempt to come to a resolution of this problem.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of dancing around, and I did keep the numbers low so you wouldn't have to take off his shoes to count, but But I think, Mr. Speaker, what we want from the minister is a deadline. Has he given the provincial or the federal government a deadline? Because we can't sit here and let our herds be jeopardized by this number going on and on and on and deciding what to do. It's an inbred herd anyhow. It's not a pure buffalo herd. Has he given the provincial or the federal government a deadline by which we want a decision made?
Mr. Speaker, I think we should all be aware that the herd being discussed here has been infected for years and years. The one solution is maintaining the separation between the buffalo and the cattle herds. Granted, with the expansion of agriculture in the north, the distance is getting closer. But I suppose one possible solution may be fencing the park area, but that's only one of the solutions being discussed with the federal government. Another possible solution may be destroying that herd.
Mr. Speaker, we're trying to move this through to culmination. While this minister and the federal minister fiddle, the cattle industry could burn. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to move them through to a decision. Let's move on just a step further, although I know it's maybe not responsible for native affairs. A great deal of the natives that depend on some of the buffalo herd, diseased as it is, for food. As the natives in this area, or the Métis in this area, are provincial responsibility. As the minister looked into the possibility of the herd is destroyed, just what we're going to do for food to tide over till the new herd comes in.
Oh, I'm sorry. The time for a question period has expired. Might there be unanimous consent to allow the minister to respond to the question? What was the question?
Well, I was listening carefully to those introductory remarks to try to detect what the question was, and as near as I can determine, the question was, have we looked into the possibility of what the natives and or Métis, who would be provincial responsibility, would do for food if we destroyed that herd? And I would have to answer that no, we haven't extensively, but we do raise a lot of Alberta beef, so that might be a possible alternative.
The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud has a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, and I refer to motion 408-1. Mr. Speaker, in looking at this reference, I must point out that question period is a very important and essential part of the whole parliamentary process, and it's to be taken very seriously because it's the opportunity for members of the opposition parties in particular to ask questions of urgent matters that require immediate responses. And my point of order is directed as a result of a question asked by the honourable member from Calgary-Bow. In referring to 401 1A, such questions should be asked only in respect of matters of sufficient urgency and importance as to require an immediate answer. Now, puffball questions are one thing, Mr. Speaker, but when the Premier of the province is asked how many pancakes did Tory MLAs flip-flop at a breakfast, that's not of any urgency to me, and it doesn't require any answer, period. And it should be ruled out of order, Mr. Speaker, and in addition, I wouldn't mind a written response as to what is considered to be a question of importance as compared to puffball questions.
Hear, hear.
Well, honourable members, I feel that the honourable member for Edmund Whitemud has a point, and I'm sorry for not interrupting earlier. But I would say, on the other hand, the chair has certainly had many occasions of a sense of deja vu since last Wednesday when we resumed on many of the questions that have been asked. And those rules also apply in this chamber of repetition. You know, when a question's been asked once on one day, it shouldn't necessarily have the same questions practically word for word the next day. But I do accept the honourable member's comments about the sense of urgency and the importance of question period, and I would refer the honourable member for Calgary-Bow to those comments. Orders.